Hello.
That's good.
Turn your mic on.
Would you be seated, please? If you have a cell phone, would you be sure it's shut off? If you want to speak tonight on something that's not on the agenda, or that's something that is, fill out one of these slips of green paper in the back and hand it to me, please. Let the records know that so far that we're missing Alec and Mike, both of whom I expect to be here, but I'm not as of yet. Okay? There is one request to speak for someone not on the agenda. That's something that's not on the agenda, and that's Rogeria? Am I saying that right? Rogeria? Roberta. Okay, I didn't see there's a B. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, if you want to take the podium, please. Look like a G to me. I just made it.
Hi, I'm Roberta Phillips. I live here in Los Altos. I've lived here for 26 years. I live on San Antonio Road. And all I wanted to say to you guys is you've got a lot of things coming ahead on your calendar and agenda and concerns of the community. And I'd like to ask you if, when you're making decisions or reviewing things, if you consider the values of this community and the residents here. And I think that the residents really do value, as stated in our general plan, the small town feel, the low profile, low density area that we live in. And I think that, that's, I would hope, a question that you would ask yourselves among all the other questions that you need to, consider when giving a proposal. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is, if you guys don't feel that you have the expertise in something, so John, you were not at the retreat, correct? Or Chris Jordan was. And I know that Chris Jordan has, up to $75,000 in discretionary money that you guys can go to him and ask him for a particular person with expertise to bring that to your commission. And I would strongly advise that you do that because I think he's very open to that. He sort of said that at the retreat. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. All right, thank you. Okay, next consideration. Well, let's go over the minutes from the last meeting on January 19th. Are there any questions or comments or additions or subtractions anyone came up with? I didn't.
I did.
Okay, good.
In looking at the potential future agenda items, it references a suggestion I made, and I think it was, I just revised it as such. Commissioner Bodnar suggested inviting, there were two issues. One is we wanted the city to provide a list of past public benefits identified in exchange for a variance. And as part of that, I suggested that we invite Lacey to outline a list of public benefits they have provided in the past that benefited the downtown. So it's a slight revision.
Dave, can you make a note of that?
Yes.
All right. Any other questions, concerns?
I move that we accept the minutes of, quick date, January 19th, subject to the revision suggested by Commissioner Bodnar.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And let it be known that 5 of us passed it. Okay. Public hearing. We have one item on the agenda. It's amendment to the CT zone district in El Camino Real. The proposed amendments to Chapter 14.5 CT, Commercial Thoroughfare Zone District of the Los Altos Municipal Code that reflect modified height limits, setback requirements, open space requirements, standards for mechanical parking systems, standards for on-site areas to accommodate delivery, service, and refuse vehicles, standards for rooftop uses, among other standards, and a potential amendment to the boundaries of the CT zone district. The Planning and Transportation Commission will review the proposed amendments and then develop a recommendation to the City Council. And Mr. Biggs, I'm assuming you're taking the lead here.
That's correct. This presentation this evening falls in my lap. Good evening, Chair Moisen, members of the Planning and Transportation Commission. We do have some amendments for you to consider for the CT zone district, along with, I wouldn't call it necessarily a change to our zone district boundaries for the CT zone, but a clarification on what the CT zone covers for one parcel, and I'll get to that as part of the PowerPoint presentation. To start with, we just need to get the device to work correctly. When it doesn't, can you go ahead and manually move that onto the next slide? Our intent is to start the discussion this evening with the map showing you the boundaries of the CT zone district. It's at the edge of City of Los Altos, adjacent to the border with the City of Mountain View, along the El Camino Real corridor. And the map on the screen overhead here shows the areas that have the CT zone district designation. That's most of the area along the El Camino Real, except for a number of parcels right there at the corner of San Antonio Road and El Camino Real, where there is a specific plan in place. Next slide, please. One of the things that the City Council asked staff to do in looking at the CT or amendments to CT zoning regulations was to also take a look across the El Camino Real at what types of businesses and uses were on the Mountain View side of the El Camino Real, and give them and provide you with an indication of the intensity of development that is taking place on our neighboring city. And that's what this map depicts. It shows the various uses that are on the Mountain View side of the El Camino Real, things such as banks and motels and the car wash, and it relates the height and number of stories along those properties for this map. And then the next slide will show you the overall, I guess, policy documents that the City of Mountain View has in place for guiding development along the El Camino Real in their city. The blue area at the corner of the El Camino Real and San Antonio Road is probably the most intense development that is occurring right now in Mountain View, adjacent to the City of Los Altos. And then you can see the two neighboring orange lots or areas there in Mountain View that have a little less dense in development, a little less height permitted on those parcels. And then the lighter brown or tan areas have the lowest heights for the portion of the El Camino Real adjacent to the City of Los Altos. Starting then with our amendments to the zoning code, we'll start first with the side yard setbacks. At present, there are no side yard setbacks for properties that are adjacent to another parcel that has a CT zoning designation. We are recommending an amendment to the code that would introduce a 7.5-foot side yard setback for all the properties in the CT zone district, and a 15-foot side yard setback for properties that are adjacent to a street, so that the corner properties would have that side yard setback. So that would give you a balance or a rhythm between the placement of buildings down the El Camino Real and distances between buildings as they reach the streets. Another modification to the setback requirements are a change to the rear yard setback requirement for properties that abut a multifamily residentially zoned property. Currently, the setback requirements are a setback of 40 feet for portions of a building that are 30 feet or below, and 100 feet for portions of a building that are over 30 feet. For parcels along the El Camino Real, we're looking to seek a reduction in that. Again, this is for parcels that are adjacent to multifamily projects, from 40 feet down to 30 feet for parcels that, or for portions of buildings that are 30 feet or below in height, and then a 70-foot setback for portions of a building that exceed that 70 or exceed the 30-foot height limit. Next slide. We're also introducing some standards for open space requirements. This is one of the feedback comments that we got from the City Council when you had a joint meeting with the Council, and we looked at the El Camino Real and took a look at what could possibly be changed. Presently, we have no yard requirements for properties along the El Camino Real in the CT Zone District. And I'll add also that for that portion, north portion of Los Altos, there aren't much in the way of public parks or open spaces for people to take advantage of and enjoy. So this requirement would provide for a private open space for each of the individual dwelling units in a multifamily project, and then also provide requirements for a common open space. We're suggesting for private open space, a minimum of 100 square feet be provided, and then for common open space, 150 square feet per unit. I'll note that for the private open space, there was a recent project on the El Camino Real that you looked at and the City Council looked at, and a number of those units had private open space areas, both at the first level and in the upper levels of the building. And I went and scaled a lot of those, and those were right around the 100 square foot range. So it looked or appeared that a project could incorporate private open space into or make it available for each of the units. So that's where that suggestion comes from. We've also included in the ordinance some standards for the open spaces, areas themselves, especially the common open space, that the areas need to be continuous, that you don't have it broken up into a lot of different components spread throughout the parcel. The open space is okay within a rear yard setback, but cannot encroach into the 20-foot buffer between the rear property line and that 20-foot distance. Then also want to acknowledge that in certain cases, rooftop uses could be counted towards the common open space of the development. Next slide. And that takes us then on to rooftop uses. We don't have provisions in the code right now for rooftop uses. This does recognize that they are permitted in the CT Zone District with some items or some standards that they would need to comply with. That would need to occur on the top of a building within the perimeter walls of the building that meet the setback requirements. There's some noise controls to minimize disturbances on adjoining residential properties, light and glare standards to prevent light splay from disturbing the residential properties that might be adjacent to these sites, compliance with air district standards. We were somewhat concerned in looking at some other rooftop regulations that if they do become very intensely used and there's a lot of barbecues occurring up there, then the smoke from those activities tends to or has a potential for bringing disturbance. So we want to make sure that we're, again, respective of the adjoining residential uses. And then refuse collection. There's provision for appropriate refuse collection in the draft ordinance in front of you. Next slide. One of the other things that was unique about the project you recently reviewed for there at 4880 El Camino Real was the use of a parking lift system. You went out to a parking lift system that's currently being used in the city of Palo Alto. We took a field trip to look at that. The city council did so as well, but there's no provisions in our code really recognizing the parking lift systems. This does recognize those. It also provides some standards for the parking systems, making sure that there's sufficient space for the queuing of vehicles as they maneuver in and out of those mechanical lift systems. They need to comply with development standards. I think the one example that we looked at in Palo Alto had a separate building that house the mechanical lift system. If something like that were to be employed in another project on the El Camino Real, we want to make sure that the standards are clear that such a building would need to comply with all of the standards that are part of the CT zoning regulations. Also want to make clear that there needs to be some form of agreement running with the land so that the parking lift system will be properly maintained and operated on into the future. There were concerns we heard from members of the public, council, yourselves, about making sure that these systems would be maintained in a way so that they did provide the required parking, that we didn't lose that parking at some point in the future. Next slide. The El Camino Real presents a unique set of circumstances in that it is a busy transportation corridor. There are provisions in the proposed code amendment in front of you that provide for at least one loading space so that deliveries can be made to residents on these sites. I think it's fair to say that we've all witnessed of late a change in the retail market where there's more and more purchases being made online, more deliveries of goods to these homes, to sites. And there was a concern that there would be a conflict between these vehicles that were stopping and making deliveries or making pickups at high-density residential projects, and the smooth flow of traffic along the El Camino Real. So we introduced a requirement for a loading space on site. Next slide. That then takes us to something that is new or sort of new, I should say, for the zoning code in the city of Los Altos. Again, the project that you reviewed on the El Camino Real included some affordable or BMR housing units. And one of the benefits to the developer in proposing or including those affordable housing units in the project were that they got some incentives or exceptions to some of our zoning standards. This is an attempt to include some zoning standards within the code that, rather than create a situation where we're kind of negotiating back and forth on what would be an appropriate site development standard to allow for a particular project that included some kind of public benefit, like an affordable housing unit. This puts into place height and reductions in setbacks, an increase in the height limit, and a reduction in setback requirements for projects that bring forward a public benefit. And this, I was going back and looking at my code, this was meant to cover not only projects that include density bonus units, but projects that have some other form of public benefit that gets negotiated through the process. There's a last paragraph there in the ordinance in front of you this evening that does acknowledge that there's a variety of state laws out there in the world, and there may be some of those laws that provide developers with opportunities to ask for incentives that are different than the ones that are listed here in the ordinance. So we've put that caveat in there, but I think the intent here again is to at least demonstrate what the city finds acceptable, or sort of a good starting point when a developer comes in and says, I have this public benefit. What type of development incentive should I be requesting, can I be looking for in order to carry my project forward? Next, we have a couple of maps. This shows the parcel there in gray at the corner of the El Camino Real and San Antonio Road. It has a 62-PUD/C7 designation on our zoning map. And although we've searched, we have not really been able to find documents that really or well describe what that nomenclature there means. I do understand in conversations with staff and other people in the city that it has an underlying CT zoning designation. So the clarification that I'm requesting for you to recommend to the City Council, for the City Council to approve, is just to confirm that that underlying zoning designation would be CT and subject to the rules, however they might ultimately wind up being. And the next slide is just to show that sort of rezone or confirmation that the underlying zoning there is CT commercial thoroughfare. And then finally, what we're requesting of the Planning and Transportation Commission this evening is to take a look at the proposed amendments to the code, receive public comment, and develop a recommendation onto the City Council. I will note that the City Council did impose a moratorium on development applications being submitted along the El Camino Real. That ends in the middle of March. I think it's March the 14th, so we're kind of under this compacted review process if we're going to make that deadline. However, if you have corrections or the public feels that changes to the ordinance should be necessary and you want to bring these back at a future date, I think we can use that as a legitimate reason to go back and ask the council to extend that moratorium, just to make sure you have sufficient time to develop your recommendations and fully vet the changes that are before you this evening. Finally, and then I'll take questions. The next slide is just the The zoning designations along the El Camino Real, we'll leave it up on the screen for reference, and there's one more slide that we used during the workshop with the city council that you had that shows the existing uses along the El Camino Real and the sites that, from a sort of a drive-by, we kind of were able to identify had some development potential. Those are the ones that have that sort of rust-colored designation there on the map. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission might have.
Want to start on this end? You have a question?
I don't. I have a few questions.
Good.
I had a question. In looking at and reading the city's general plan language related to El Camino, one of my first question was, when was this conception first drafted? And then the follow-up is, in it, they talk about how they want to create additional affordable housing, and I'm wondering, since this went into effect, how much have we actually created in that area?
I know we've had the project at 4880 El Camino Real, the recent project, and then I believe the Colonnade project also included some affordable units.
And when do you have any sense of when this was drafted, this
It's
section?
been back in the 1990s, late 1990s.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
Are you talking about how much they get as an incentive, or what the state requirements are per?
No, I'm just trying to,
It's your general
I just want to, I want to get a sense of if we've made even a dent in our goal. And if that goal remains, how do we accomplish that in a
Because it
better
has to do
way?
with the number of units being built now, of course.
Commissioner Bodnar, we have, I think, 26 multifamily affordable units along El Camino, plus 38 behind the Colonnade project.
Okay.
And basically, each multifamily project has provided at least 10%
Okay.
in below market rate.
Elsewhere, I saw that there was a requirement that there is retail on the first floor. Am I reading that right? Does that remain, or is that no longer a requirement? So if we do a residential project, we're not saying they need to put retail on the first floor of that? All right.
That requirement would remain. It's part of the conditional uses or the uses that are part of the CT regulations. So the ordinance before you doesn't change the permitted or conditionally permitted uses in the
Was
CT.
there consideration of, like, if we want to put multifamily building, wouldn't we want to allow them to not have retail at the bottom floor? Doesn't that seem like that would be something that we should maybe
But you're not
consider?
limited to retail. According to the staff
It
report.
says you're required.
Well, no, it's retail, office, hotel.
And then through the conditional use permit process, you can do 100%
Okay,
residential.
Got it. Okay. Sorry. Can you give us a little bit of the history why this area in the center is CN and everything else is CT?
Can you go back one slide? Which,
New slide. No, it's the planned unit development.
The purple, why is that a different,
Are you talking about the pink in the middle?
the pink, yeah.
No, there's a specific
In the
plan for
in the
that.
last one, it was pink. Right in the heart of this long stretch, we have a different designation, and it'd be great to have that historical perspective or understanding of why.
well, that is the Sherwood
Sherwood Triangle
Gateway
specific.
specific plan. And
What?
Sherwood Gateway specific plan, so it's covered by a specific plan. And I believe the purpose of the specific plan was, one, to see consolidation of the properties and an overall cohesive land development pattern that, You can see from this map that there's a lot of small parcels and
Yeah.
a lot of disjointed uses and a lot of uses that really kind of conflict with one another. You have the residential right next to parking lots for the commercial and the trash collection and deliveries. And I think that it's fair to say that the overall goal was to hopefully clean that area up as new development came forward. So rather than just zone it CT, it was felt at the time that a specific plan would result in a better guidance for those property owners on into the future and result in a better mix of buildings and land uses right there.
Okay, I mean, I would think that maybe, not now, but in the future, that if we are really changing what we think El Camino should look like, maybe that should evolve to get in line with.
You bring up a good point. I was remiss for not relaying this as part of my presentation, but one of the things that the City Council has said when we were talking to them about moving this forward is that they view this set of zoning code amendments as an initial first step in coming up with policies for the El Camino Real, either through a specific plan or through additional general plan policies or even further modifications to the zoning code. So I would expect, within the next year and a half, 2 years maybe, we would be looking at some other kind of regulatory document that would provide even greater guidance to the El Camino Real, maybe even something like the city of Mountain View has done on the north side of the street there.
There's this discussion on the rear yard, and I think you answered that. You were saying we actually were reducing the requirements. And did that last project conform to this, or they actually abided by the original requirements?
They conform with the current zoning regulations.
They
The
do,
only
okay.
exception they got was for the height exception.
Okay. In terms of the open space, you mentioned that the last project was the model, or the El Camino project was the model, but you mentioned that it was for the top and the bottom units. And when I think about open spaces on El Camino, I imagine them being towards the rear, right? You wouldn't desire as much a large open space overlooking the front. So how do you imagine working for the units that are in the front, that same requirement?
I would expect that they would create the open space at the side of the buildings like the last project that came forward. Maybe the ones that are a little higher up on the building, they would be, depending on the design of the building, they could put it there at the front and maybe have it wrap around the corner of the building a little bit to create that open space.
So I think that's probably how they would do it too, but I wonder, is the continuous open space requirement making, like, on a side, you would presume, let's say you have a bedroom and you make a little patio, and then another bedroom has another little patio. Are we requiring that to be one big?
That's two different kinds.
You-
There's the common space, and then there's individual unit space.
Right, I'm talking about the individual unit space.
Yeah,
But it's
those
100
would not
square
have to be
feet.
continuous. Those could be,
Oh, those could be
they could be
broken up
individual
between
and
each of
broken
them.
up
Okay.
and accessed from the unit itself.
That makes more sense. I didn't understand in the rooftop uses, paragraph G. Can you just explain to me what we're trying to accomplish here?
That was paragraph D?
G.
Oh, G.
About the use of conventional energy sources for space heating and cooling shall be minimized.
It was an attempt to, if rooftop uses were created, they should be oriented in a way to take advantage of appropriate sunlight, rather than putting the uses, let's say, on the shady side or the portion of the building that would cast shadows all the time. They should, try and take advantage of the sunny side so that they're minimizing the need for space heaters or other shade structures to be
Got it.
put up.
Okay.
Plus, keeping in mind that, there's I think a desire here in Los Altos to see room be maintained for solar panels and kind of recognizing that as well.
Okay. The mechanical parking, my question, my concern is if mechanical parking is sufficient for all of vehicle parking, does that anticipate that also visitors would be using it? Or, should there be, have you thought about maybe having visitor parking be not this mechanical parking system?
The visitor parking under this proposed language would not have to be mechanical parking. This is simply saying that the required parking for a project could be in a mechanical system, but it's not saying that it's
It
required.
has to be.
So if the code required, let's say, 2 spaces per dwelling unit, and they came up with their total and they required so many visitor parking spaces, those visitor parking spaces could be, in the field of the parking level in some way, so it didn't have to worry about being parked into the structure.
But they
having
could, if they really wanted to, get a minimum, they could actually put visitors. My issue is, I don't know if, permanent residents, I believe in the mechanical systems for permanent residents and for tenants long-term, but not necessarily for that every visitor who comes in is going to be able to navigate and manage that.
That's a good point.
Something to think about. Or retail, too. Retail parking would be, I think, challenging for folks. Those are my questions. Good.
So I have 2 questions. One has to do with, in suggesting that there be a modification to the rear yard setbacks when the properties abut multifamily residential as opposed to single-family residential, what was the thinking?
The thinking was that, like we have in the current zoning code, lesser setbacks for or between properties that have higher density residential, it seemed appropriate then, if we were going to permit higher density residential along the El Camino Real and the site abutted higher density residential, that you could allow that lesser setback.
The reason I ask that is because it's still people. And
That's
so
true.
I feel like our residents deserve protection whether they're close or not, and whether they live in small units in multifamily or are fortunate to have a single-family home. So I wanted to know, this was not something that was suggested by council?
The council did bring up the idea of, we have multifamily residential and single-family residential, and the setbacks between multifamily sites, development on multifamily zone sites, tends to be less of a separation between the two. So since you're having higher density development, more of the site can be dedicated towards units. Why not consider allowing some additional site development to occur in those situations so that you can sort of go along the line of trying to achieve more housing units in the city?
Okay. The second question has to do with a letter that you forwarded to us from the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, which asked if they reorganized their headquarters, which currently are 100% office use, and they wanted to redevelop it. They asked what would affect them, and as I read this, it appeared that they would be at the 1/2-to-1 ratio and 30 feet maximum, because they provide no housing if they're 100% office. Am I correct in that?
Well, the site that they mentioned in their letter is Zone CT, and given the placement of the site to other properties that have a similar or office space designation, they wouldn't be subject to these same setback requirements. They have a lesser setback requirement. In fact, the rear yard setback is 0 feet for this particular site. The one thing that would be a change for them is the side yard setback, where right now it would be 0 feet. Under the proposed ordinance, it would be 7.5 feet at the side yards, and then they'd be allowed to build up to 45 feet.
But the usage, they're allowed to stay 100% office? Because we were just talking about mandating retail or lodging or housing on the first floor.
They would be able to maintain their office use. Professional and office administrative services are a permitted use in the CT zone.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Those
You're
are my
welcome.
questions.
Sally?
So, in a sense, we're correcting the side setbacks by suggesting a 7.5 foot, but we're leaving the rear yard for something that doesn't abut residential at 0. Why do you think that's okay to leave it at 0 versus giving it some rear yard setback?
I think that it's okay to leave it at 0 because when you get into the office and commercial types of uses, you have typically higher density development occurring there and less conflicts between something like a residential use and a business use, either a restaurant, retail, office use, and all the activities that are associated with those. So when you have commercial abutting commercial, you have similar types of impacts on the uses, and you have a similar range of occupancy in the buildings. They're typically occupied for the commercial uses during the daytime, what I'll call the daytime, or the normal working hours, and you don't have that occurring when most people are home enjoying their houses in the evening.
And then I don't know whether this is actually a question or a comment, but looking at the original text for Chapter 14.50, and it talks about the specific purposes of the commercial thoroughfare. And just because I personally, we're looking at some details, but we didn't look at this overall specific purpose, which to me is the guiding principle of the chapter. I would actually have some comments to that. We can save it, for discussion, but when you look at the specific purposes as outlined, and then with the edits that you're suggesting making, I see some inconsistency there. So, just a comment.
Discussion.
Discussion.
Actually, I have a couple other questions that I thought of.
Sally, you too? Go ahead.
Referencing the letter that we received, I thought there were some good points in it, and I'm interested to hear what staff's thoughts are to some of them.
Which one?
So they made a bunch of points that I thought had value. One of the first, and then I'd love it if you could comment on them, has to do with what is the right number for heights. I know we have, stuck with 35, and that's, feasible to build 3 stories. But that presumes it's not a 10-foot per floor. It's actually closer to between 11 and 12 feet per floor. So if we're going to be okay with a 4th floor, is really adding 10 feet the right number? Or do we want to encourage, these bigger joists? And let's it doesn't have to be a nice, round, perfect number, but let's make it a real number so that they won't come to us requesting a variance for 2 feet when we all know you can't actually build another floor with 10 feet.
Well, I started at the 45-foot height limit, and I thought that, given the feedback we've heard from everyone, that seemed like a good, appropriate number to begin with. And then when we looked at the waiver or the concession or that incentive that they could get, I took a look across the El Camino Real as well at what was happening in Mountain View, and those properties on the map that I showed you that were kind of that brown or tan colored, those had a 55-foot height limit, and they seemed to be the predominant properties along the El Camino Real. So I thought with the corner at El Camino Real and San Antonio Road, you had that sort of node area where you were going up and creating sort of a distinctive higher density, taller building development right there. And then from that key point, you started tapering down as you went further kind of northwest and southeast along the El Camino Real. And so 55 feet, the additional 10 feet to the project sort of maintained a similar rhythm along both sides of the El Camino Real. It's not quite what was granted to the developer at 4880 El Camino Real, but it still appeared to be a range where you could get a floor area and hopefully encourage or increase in the height of the between the floor and the ceiling, and then hopefully encourage that some of these units, or maybe more of these units, become more affordable by design rather than allow for some of the very tall ceilings where they become more of a luxury type of unit. So it seemed like when you added up the 12 feet plus the 9 feet or 10 feet for each of the floors, you came up with right around the 55 feet per my back-of-the-envelope calculations. So that was the basis for my starting point at the 55 feet.
If we left this particular number open and invited actual builders to tell us what they think is the actual number for 4 floors, would you be open to revising it by a foot or two?
Oh,
if it
yeah,
just
I
comes
mean-
out that everyone says it can't be built this way. You're making us squeeze too much and just for a foot or two.
I mean, I'm open to it. This is the whole purpose
Yeah.
of these public hearings. We start off with a set of recommendations, and, I listen to your questions. You get feedback from the public and people that own property or develop property there, and I think all that leads into a refinement of what you'll ultimately recommend onto the city council.
Okay.
I think it's always good to provide a basis or a reason of support behind your recommendations, and I've shared, at least my thoughts on the recommendation before you right now.
Okay.
So,
One of the other things they brought up is, could a side yard on a corner site be considered open space? Because I think you said open space shouldn't be on a side yard, but on a corner unit, it probably has an even bigger setback, right?
it does.
Might-
Certainly something you can consider. The way I had drafted the ordinance, I was really trying to achieve the open space, the common open space in the rear yard, away from, the shadows that you get and the kind of limited areas that you get, plus along the side yards. Plus, it seems if you have open space in the side yards, that's where I would suspect a majority of the private open space is going to be going, and where you're going to have bedrooms and so forth, and just trying to minimize the conflicts between the activities in the common open space and the private open space and the residential units.
Okay. And they also, they talk about queuing, with the parking lifts. Something that made sense to me when they say parking lift sizes don't really conform to the dimensions of our parking stalls, and that maybe a better way to draft this is that it conform to what the requirements of maybe several generic parking stall manufacturers. Like if there's a certain standard that they all try to meet, maybe that should be the measurement for parking stall mechanical systems rather than just sort of our parking lot numbers, because it's a different beast.
For the project at 4880 El Camino Real, the deck for the vehicles didn't meet the dimensions for our parking space, but when you looked at the area that the vehicle could occupy, that area did comply with the minimum dimensions for a parking stall. So
I don't understand.
it provided the deck was sufficient for the wheelbase of the vehicle, and then you have what goes beyond the wheelbase. It's almost like a lawn strip. Going to a garage, you've got the 2 strips of concrete that accommodate the wheels to your car, but the car actually occupies more than where those 2 strips of concrete are at. Similar.
So in fact, it's number of cars that's critical, not so much the size of the space. If the mechanical system can park the required number of cars, as long as it fits the car, as long as it works, we really don't care what size the space is, as long as it meets the numbers.
Exactly. It's got to be
As
built to work.
long as it's not sized only for Fiats. It's got to be sized for normal cars. And
Right.
once you're sized for normal cars, then we really don't
Right.
care.
It's got to be built to fit and not just have extra space
Yeah.
that's buried somewhere underneath. The queuing space issue that they raised, I thought was interesting, and though not suggested by them, I wonder if there's a way to incentivize applicants to install more than one lift system. Like, is there some thing that they can get so that we actually encourage, or convert? A different strategy is to simply require, if you have more than X number of parking spots, you have to install 2 systems, so that we don't have a situation where we have 70 cars all
On one lift.
on one lift system. Like, that's also something that I would want to know what best practices are in that area. What do those lift system people suggest? Like, if you want to wait no more than 2 minutes for your car, or I don't even know what the minute, that's something I thought we may want to.
But I'm not sure that's something we want to codify because the technology will be changing. So I think when John writes the proposed code, he has to write it in such a way that it is based on what the goal is, to be able to park the cars and minimize the queuing. And that loosey-goosey way of saying minimizing allows staff to say, you have 15 cars queuing, this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And they can see what is going on, but it has to be addressed, I agree.
Okay, those were questions I had about this letter.
I don't have any questions, just some sort of comments. First of all, I think staff, I think you did a very great job of putting this together because it's very easy to follow. And maybe it's because I'm in that business of commercial real estate, but I'll bet most people could look at this and picture every single building and what the potential is. And so let's look at what we've got here. You've got with what you call high potential sites, there are 12 of them. In my estimation, in the next 10 years, no more than 4 or 5 will be developed. That's my personal opinion. And of those, they're all going to be small ones. I don't think you're going to develop the CT on the corner of El Camino, the southwest corner of El Camino in San Antonio, because that's a retail site, and it's encumbered with leases, long-term leases, so they're pretty much, and you're not going to, so you could go through and say, well, that's an office project, that's not going to happen. So what's going to happen, from a practical sense, is that we're going to see more apartments coming up here on the smaller sites. That's what's going to happen. So it's wonderful that we address this, but we're really talking about, I think, a very limited number of potential sites, and almost all of them, if not all of them, going towards residential. So, I mean, that's the reality of, I think, what we're all looking at, folks. I mean, that's what's going to happen in that corridor. And if you look across the street, the most you're asking to go is 55 feet, where across the street, they've gone up as high as 10 stories.
75.
So, I mean, that's almost twice as high as what we're recommending. So, I don't know. I'm just when I go into this, I'm going, well, this is really not too big a deal to me. It's not, I don't think we're asking for anything obsessive.
Wait to see what the public has to say about whether it's a big deal.
Telling you what I'm saying. Well, there's a practical world, and then there's a
Theoretical.
political world. So with no more,
Applicant.
we have, I think, 11 of you that want to speak. We're going to limit it to 3 minutes.
The applicant should.
We don't have an applicant.
Oh, no.
This is CT
There's
zone.
no
got it,
no,
got it,
this
got it,
is
got
CT, no.
Mary Schoolgard wanted to go early. You can pull the card out.
Okay.
Ask for the water, too, when you're.
Can you pull Mary's out? Another way. Oh, more came.
Okay.
I just wanted Mary Schoolgard was here.
What do you do?
Mary wanted to speak early. She got in first and put her at the bottom, and she needs to be.
I didn't do it on purpose. No, what are you doing?
She hasn't already, she did another one.
Let's
sorry.
do another one. Okay, there are, I think, a dozen of us, so we're going to limit it to 3 minutes. So when you hear the 3-minute buzz, that's all, folks. Okay? So, no particular order. Mary, you first? Shugard?
Mary Schoolgard, 1055 Wilma Lane. I hope you've taken the time to read the written comments about the proposed amendments. They're based on 40 years of interchange with every planning director since 1978. And I did not include the fact that any El Camino code change would directly affect the immediate neighbors, and then it would creep into the neighbors next to them, and then to the neighbors next to them, and pretty soon it's going to change the tenor of Los Altos. I want you to remember that this is primarily Los Altos people pay the big price to live there because it is an R1 large lot family neighborhood. It is not a commercial district. It is not a multi-district. Some of that is fine. But you should keep in mind that that is what the main part of Los Altos is all about. Several in the audience have similar concerns, and I will let them speak since I already wrote mine down. Otherwise, I'm available for any questions, and you would be welcome to come look on my property and see exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Mariel Stoops?
Mariel Stoops, 1030 Rima Lane. I'm a 17-year resident. I want to just point out that it's so fantastic that you come up with such amazing ideas, and I really commend you for the work there. But you don't live there. We live there. We have small children. We purchased that area knowing what the key code was. And now I come in here, and you're fabricating all these possibilities for a building that potentially could affect the way of life for us. So I also want to point out to you that across El Camino, you don't suit any R1 residences. So please do not come and tell me you're just going to mirror what you see across the street. Across the street is not Los Altos. So please keep that in mind. Further, I'd like to make sure that you correct the situation where you inform all residents appropriately. I got a card saying to show up yesterday. It was incorrect. There's at least another 12 people that would have been here today, and they would share exactly my same opinion. So I encourage you, but please correct your process, because your paperwork might be okay, but if you don't inform the citizens who are going to be affected, then you're acting unfairly. Thank you.
I'm going to call the next two so the one can get ready. So Darren Jones, and after that is David Waltham.
Hello, I'm Darren Jones. I live at 1035 Rilma Lane. Sorry, I have a couple of notes here. So I wanted to mention that I'm a 17-year resident there, and since I moved in, my neighbor across the way lost significant privacy when the Residence Inn went there. Their backyard was a beautiful sort of hideaway. You could hear a little bit of El Camino, but when the Residence Inn went up, now that there's Klieg lights there all night long, it's really just not the same. So I'm afraid that something similar could happen to other residential properties that abut the CT zone. So I would echo Mariel's concern that on the Mountain View side, really those properties largely do not abut residential, and on the Los Altos side, just by looking at least half of them do, maybe more. So I think that's a big difference. And my request would be that when I moved in there, it was next door to commercial. I understand that. And again, it was with the understanding of the existing rear yard setbacks that I believe sort of protect the Los Altos residential, my property specifically. So I'm a little afraid that when you're showing for instance, the options for below market units, generally encroach upon the neighbors, right? You're going up in height, you're getting closer. So I would encourage you, if any other incentives you could apply, or mitigating factors that you could require, such as screening, vegetation, whatnot. I understand there may be a requirement there now, but frankly, at least on some of those properties, that screening requirement is not enforced, and most of the vegetation has died, which is unfortunate. So, yeah, I think that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Darren. And after David is Brian Robertson.
So first I wanted to thank you guys for your service. I am a resident on Rilma Lane as well. I live next door to Darren. I'm a fifth-generation Los Alton. My kids are sixth-generation Los Altons. And we moved back to Los Altos specifically because of the village and quiet community. Right? We moved from Oakland down here to come back to that, and that's something I think is worth preserving in Los Altos. I heard many times tonight, across the street they're doing this, the city of Mountain View is doing this. I don't know if we're trying to be Mountain View, but that seems to be something that we want to be distinct and be ourselves as Los Altons, and keep that when you come off down San Antonio and it gets very quiet right away. Once you've gone big, you can't go back. There's no going back and trying to preserve that community. With that, I think there was also some discussion about so the setbacks and the privacy screening. Currently, the privacy screening is not maintained on the other side of the wall. Second-story window, I can see right into it from my bedroom. So I can only imagine another 2 stories of windows looking into my backyard or into my bedroom. The other comments that were brought up was an incentive for housing and for developers. But as a resident, all the incentives are really disincentives for us. They're punitive for us. So I'd just like you to take that in mind. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. After Brian is Mercia, the owner of 4846 El Camino.
Jerry, can I go last?
No.
Well, alrighty then. All right, start my clock. Hey, Dave, I can't see the clock, so I don't have a bunch. There we go. Cool. There we go. Ready to start? Got to get my notes here. All right. Not that it matters much, but not a resident now, but I was a resident for over 30 years. I've seen every decade back to the 70s, 60s, actually, technically speaking. So the whole, we want to keep it small thing, I get that. But all the growth we've done has been good. Downtown, I remember the arguments about downtown. It's like, oh, keep it tiny. But anyway, with respect to El Camino is the Grand Boulevard project, right? It's the last scope of where we can grow, and we have to grow. It's not a question of if, it's not a question of when, it's just a question of how we're going to do it. So the discussions that have come along around setbacks and everything else, I like a lot of what John's put together here. Realistically speaking, from an engineering and architectural standpoint, there's a few things to consider. For starters, as Ronit pointed out, having a 10-foot extra incentive just doesn't work from a height standpoint. Any builder will come in and tell you you can't do that. It means basically you're saying, I want an 8-foot ceiling. So as a real estate broker, I can tell you right now that if we're trying to uphold the standard of quality in Los Altos, which is really what we want to do with any project we do on El Camino, we want to stay with 10-foot ceilings, okay? So if that means you're going to do that, that means you're going to have plates at least 12 inches, preferably 15, give or take. So it's going to push the height up. So the number has to go up. But it doesn't have to go up a lot. So that's the only thing I would suggest in terms of making some changes. The setbacks, the one thing that I don't think we talked about, maybe we did, was the 20-foot no play zone on the open space. What'd you call that? Landscape setback. Why that's not included doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, if it's landscaped and it's open, which is probably what it's going to be, especially if it's a residential project, just include it. Otherwise, you're wasting the width of whatever the space is times 20 feet for nothing. And it's most likely going to be landscaped anyway. The other open space standards, the 100 and 150 feet, if you look at Palo Alto standards, they're much lower numbers. They're 60 and 80 feet respectively. I'd go back and tweak those numbers just a little bit. I think if there's have been plans submitted, I know that we've talked about this a bit, it might be circumstance that we've gone to a higher number, but the practicality is a lot of projects are going to be lower numbers, and I think that's probably a little more realistic. The other thing that's not in this proposal, which I think is right on what Chair Moisen was saying, is we have a CUP requirement for residential. And I agree. I mean, really, the city of Los Altos Long Island Community does not need any more office. It doesn't need any more retail. Really doesn't need any more retail. So why don't we change that from a conditional use to a permitted use? Just make it easy. That way we don't have to go through the extra steps. So that's it.
All right, thank you. Mercia, and after that is Jeff.
Hi, my name is Mirchai, and I'm the sole owner of the 4846 and 4856 El Camino Real. And as most of you know, we're in a process to do a development there. We already just been submitted in September of last year when everything kind of stopped. First, I want to say I really appreciate what John did. I think it's a very good first cut of what we needed for a while, and to understand more of how the limits are. And obviously, we are we've been respectively interested to look at the height of the buildings, and we were the ones that suggested for 4880 to, drop their 12-foot requirement to, 10 feet, so we can put the project through, because I think it makes a lot of sense to have only 10 feet clear from a sellable standpoint. What I want to bring up, it's a couple of things that maybe you should consider and look at. One of the requirements proposed by the city staff was that on the 5th floor, we have another 10-foot setback. What's going to happen if we're going to do that, then we've been through the exercise on 4880, when the financial report showed that we need to, for us to fulfill the number of BMRs, we have to have a full 5th floor to be able to make that happen. So what I think is going to happen if we do that, not just from a construction standpoint, it's not going to make sense, because we're going to have a lot of damaging 4th floor roofing, but also will not be able to offer the same number of BMR units, which I believe is the goal for the city. My goal is to ensure that we work with city staff, with PTC and the city council in cooperation, and find solutions that will address all the neighbors' concerns, specifically on privacy. In our property, we have over 80-foot redwood trees in the back, and if we need to do more planting, we'll do more planting to just ensure the privacy buffer is in place. We do not have any type of R1 residential behind us, so we don't have the issue that neighbors brought up that will be things that will infringe in their property privacy. And another thing that we have to look at, it's the delivery part, which is it's not into the setback. It's not included in the setback, which what's going to happen is that we're going to have to push buildings away from El Camino, which kind of contradicts to one of the members mentioned today, that we want larger rear setbacks and not smaller ones. And in this case, with the proposal, we'll have to push our building, in our case, for about 15 feet from the street. So that's kind of everything I have today, and thank you for your time and consideration.
Thanks, Marcia. After Jeff is Anita.
Good evening, Jeff Potts, SDG Architects. I'll try to go quickly here. I'm the one that submitted the letter with the outline of the zoning. If the city wants to maximize density, which is what it states in the multifamily zoning ordinance for the other multifamily zones, and the city wants more affordable housing units, which is what the city council stated and what the general plan states along here, then the CT zoning regulations need to be compatible with the 38 unit to the acre density that is the current density in the CT zone, and the concessions and waivers to get those BMRs need to be effective and useful. First of all, we're not sure that actually placing limits on concessions and waivers meets the state density bonus law, but if we are going to place those limits, they should be realistic. We've talked about the height. I mean, the realistic height for a story is around 11'6". If you wanted to have a realistic starting height, it would be 46 feet, which is 1 foot different than it is now. And a realistic finishing height, it would be a little bit over 57 feet, a very little bit. That would allow the development of upscale condos with 10-foot ceilings and a reasonable structural section. So that's what really makes sense.
And also 46 and 57?
57 plus.
46 and 57 and 3/4. I think it's in the outline that I provided earlier. And the setback concession may be helpful, but it's minimal, and what it really doesn't do is, again, jive with other sections of the code. We're talking about reducing the rear setback from 40 to 30 feet, but we're talking about imposing 150 square feet of common open space per unit that we want in the back. Those two things don't go together. If you don't count the 20-foot buffer, that means you have 10 feet if you're going to push your building to that setback to count as community open space. You're never going to get to a number that's compatible with the 38 units to the acre. So either the open space number needs to be lower per unit, which it should be, and the 20 foot of landscaping, which I think is a tremendous asset to the neighbors and should be there, should count as open space. If I'm sitting in a forest, I'm in open space as far as I'm concerned. So if you count that as open space, I'm not sure the lower concession on the rear yard really actually helps because the developer's going to need it for open space anyway. So again, in the CT zoning section, the height limits really should correspond to buildable heights. The 40-foot setback is fine. Instead of 30 feet tall, it should be 35 feet tall, so you can actually build something in there that works. In the front, again, 46, and then when we get into the concessions, 11 and a half feet for a floor. In general, the setbacks are fine as written, although 25 feet on a busy main street is excessive on the front. If we want to protect the neighbors, we'll push these buildings forward towards the street. And if I can make one last point on the loading zone, and I think Mircea made it, by saying that loading zone, I mean, I understand it should be off the street, trucks should drive in forward, they should drive out onto the street forward, but if we say it has to be outside the setback, again, you're talking about taking a 25-foot setback and changing it to 40 feet, because that's what it's going to take to bring a truck in, park it, back it out, and bring it back onto the street. So again, you're pushing back towards the neighbors, where what we really want to do is say, yes, put it in the setback, make it look nice, screen it, and pull the building away from the neighbors and give them that open space in the back. And I can't see how much time I have left, but...
You don't have
You're
any time
done.
left.
You're
Oh, I
out.
thought the timer was like a warning.
No,
Sorry
that's
about
it.
that. I see the
Thank
clock
you.
still ticking. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Anita and then Pat.
Good evening, Anita Enander, 39-year resident of Los Altos. I also want to echo what other people have said. The staff did just an amazing amount of work to get all of this done. And I'd also like to echo something that a couple of other people have said, which is if we're going to have multifamily here, it seems to me it needs to be a regular use and not a conditional use. And it's time to make that adjustment. With respect to the open space, I think one problem with doing it the way it's proposed is that you actually incentivize developers to want to build 2- and 3-bedroom units so that they have to do less open space than when we really, I think, want more 1- and 2-bedroom units and a higher density in that area. So I think the Menlo Park option, which was in one of the letters that was sent to you, it showed a kind of a different way to approach the shared open space, might be a better way to go. The third thing that I'd like to mention, and it's really the most important, I think, is that item .200, I think, is terribly confusing and probably ought to just get dropped for now. The density bonus incentive law is not a public benefit. We have public benefit language in our zoning code. It's in downtown. It affects a number of our zones. CD, CDR3, CRS. It talks about exceptions for public benefit. Those are not things that are required by law. Those are quid pro quos between the developer and the city. And I think to conflate that kind of public benefit with the density bonus requirement is just really confusing and just lets us in for a big mess. I know that staff is in the process of preparing a new ordinance that will deal with the density bonus requirements. And I think, therefore, it really only raises two questions. One, do you want to have really a public benefit exception in this zone, like what we have downtown, which is different from the density bonus, which probably doesn't make sense when you're doing housing, as I think Chairman Moisen said, that's most likely what we're going to develop here. So if you're not going to do that, then you're back to the density bonus, and the ordinance under development is probably going to cover things. If you then want to say, in this circumstance, we only want to offer either the height option or a setback change, yeah, maybe it argues for trying to do that, but I don't think you can enforce that until you get the other ordinance in place. So that's that. And then I want to answer Commissioner Bodner's questions. The general plan information that you had in front of you was written in 2002, and the housing element material was revised in 2015. And I believe that the items that the chairman mentioned as the most likely places for development are also listed in the housing element as a high probability potential sites for development. And that goes back to my first point, which is just make them developable. And thank you.
Thank you.
Timing.
Your timing was excellent. After Pat is Richard Campbell.
Hi, Pat Marriott, Oakhurst Avenue. I've only lived here 8 years. I also found some of the stuff confusing, and I want to particularly thank Commissioner Bodnar because you asked a lot of the questions that came up for me. The main thing is, what is the city's goal here? And we always talk about housing, and this has come up, and so this obviously on El Camino is a good place for it. If that's so, why are we specifying that every unit has to have a 100-square-foot balcony if we're trying to get density and more affordable housing? So I think this has been brought up in various ways. We also, I think, should be forward-looking. A lot of cities are talking about micro units, and I'm not suggesting that we want them, but I think we should look ahead and say somebody may pop up and say, I want to build 400-square-foot apartments. Are we going to be okay with that? What would it mean? What would be the size limit? I'd like to see it baked into the code as opposed to waiting until some developer asks for it. As far as offices, it sounds like we're sort of leaning more toward housing than offices, which is good because the more offices we build, the more ABAG will require us to build housing, and I don't know if SB 35 is going to pass, but housing seems to be what everybody wants the most. The report says the ground floor of all mixed use may be limited to retail, hotel, motel. Will it or won't it? I don't understand what the may be. And Anita brought up the confusion between public benefits and the density law. They're kind of munged together. And I said it was apples and oranges, but Anita actually said to me she thought it was apples and aardvarks. And I think that's really very different. The report says only height and setbacks are listed because those are the principal site development standards of the CT zone, but the California density bonus offers other incentives like fewer parking spaces. And public benefits require negotiation, so depending on the use and the value of the benefit, why would we say up front, we're willing to give you an extra 10 feet if we don't know what the benefit would be? To me, that's kind of like showing your cards before you sit down at the negotiating table. This report is a reaction to a lot of problems we experienced with 4880, and that's good. I'm glad that we're trying to fix that up. I'd really like to see some big picture thinking about down the road, what's coming, as I mentioned, micro units, anything else that we see other cities experiencing, because we always seem to be reacting instead of planning. And I really urge all of you on the commission and staff to try to look further down the road so that when the next developer comes up, we have something that's already in place that will cover what the developer wants. And by the way, I absolutely thought the 10-foot was kind of silly as an incentive because even I know that you can't build another floor in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another good person.
And the final one will be Roberta after Richard.
Excuse me. Excuse me, sorry. Good evening. My name is Richard Campbell. I'm an architect. I have an office in Palo Alto, but I've been a resident of Los Altos since 1970. And during those 47 years, I spent 11 of those years on the Planning Commission. This was a long time ago. Most of you were probably in grade school back then. But the one thing that I recall about my term on the Planning Commission is how ferociously protective we were of the low-density sort of village character of Los Altos. Back then, we never had a request for higher density along El Camino. It never came up. But things have changed. You can see all up and down El Camino, there's an intensification of the density on El Camino and building heights and so on. And I think if Los Altos, as I understand it, certainly does have the objective of providing more housing and in particular affordable housing, if we want to do that in Los Altos, this is really the only opportunity you have. And we are looking at one of these properties right now with a developer. We're very early in that process, so we haven't really had a chance to sort of test that project against some of these guidelines. But we do think that as other architects spoke, Jeff, as he said, that we would like to see the height be a little bit higher. We would like to see the density a little bit more. As the buildings get larger, right now the density is I think it's 38 per acre, as I recall. And as buildings get larger, that density just doesn't work out very well. So those are some of the preliminary things that we've been looking at. But we think that, again, if Los Altos wants to get additional housing, and particularly low-cost housing here in the city, this is the place to do it. There's nowhere else. Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, Richard? Oh, no, final one is, Roberta, sorry.
And I did want to talk about the public benefit because it came up. You mentioned inviting Lacey back. And I know that Mary Prochnow has suggested that perhaps...
Does this have to do with this subject here?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right.
Oh, we're talking about public benefit? Yeah?
In the CT zone.
In the CT zone.
Okay, so again, I think we need to look at what is a public benefit. And before we invite Lacey back or anybody else, I think that the community needs to weigh in on what they feel a public benefit is, since it's been so undefined to this point. It really is. And even Mayor Prochnow said it, you know, what she's seen in the past as listed as a public benefit really is not a public benefit. And I agree with Anita that we cannot confuse the California bonus density laws with what a public benefit is. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to close public comment. Okay, well, we heard a lot of stuff. I'm going to start on this end. Sally?
Okay. All righty then. I'm going to start with the Chapter 14.50 as it is, and I alluded to this in my question or comment to staff earlier. So I think the specific purposes for the CT districts as listed A through F and the existing are out of date. So I'm going to particularly focus on B and E. So I think B talks about, and I'm starting here because this to me is the top. I mean,
B baby boy and E.
B baby boy on page 1 of attachment 2.
And E as in Edward.
E as in Edward, yes, exactly. So B talks about to strengthen the city's economic base through promotion of El Camino for high revenue destination commercial uses. I think you've heard already commentary tonight. I don't know that that's exactly how we want to put it, because that's really not what we're talking about, I think, at this point in time in our area or society in general. E, I think we want to emphasize the word may not be constructive, but I'm putting it in here just for purposes of illustration, to emphasize a constructive proportion of retail, office, service, and residential uses. So, I mean, to me, E is clearly written with our historic wish to keep retail, which is not, I think, what's going to do for us in the future, trying to look forward. So, and then actually some of the speakers mentioned to this, and I would agree that conditional uses, the two that I think should actually be permitted uses, added to the list of permitted uses, are I, as in igloo, for mixed-use projects, including a combination of multifamily and non-residential uses, and K for multifamily housing. I don't see why those would require conditional use. So with that at the top level, then I think we can I'll move into some of my comments on what we looked at. And I do want to commend you. You actually pulled this all together from lots of informed communications at both PTC and City Council, lots of feedback. So thank you for that. I felt with some of the numbers, I was wondering about benchmarks. So we talked about, I won't belabor it, but the open space. I really questioned 100 square feet per dwelling unit. I remember back on my Design Review Commission days when we talked about balconies, a passive use balcony at 4 feet deep, if we were going to give them 100 square feet feet, that'd have to be a 25, foot wide balcony, if my math is correct, at 4 feet deep. These are massive balconies for smaller units. It really, I don't think that is, so I would prefer to see a benchmark, and then same for the common open space. That's a common thread with some of the comments tonight. I think the other place a benchmark would be helpful is, again, back to the queuing at the mechanical garages. Is it 15%? There may be other factors, like if there's 2 lifts, et cetera, et cetera. I won't belabor that. I would like to see a benchmark that makes sense.
Can I ask you a question, Sally?
Yes.
Do you think, as someone here said, I can't remember the 11 names, that the 20-foot landscape buffer should be counted towards, I'm assuming, common space?
I think it makes sense. My only concern would be the use and the noise. So if you're right at the property line, you're putting a barbecue and a big sound system, I don't think that's appropriate. But I think if you have it as a passive open space, then that to me would make sense as well. You don't want the speaker system right there, though. Yeah.
All right.
So thanks for asking that. I thought the other thing that was important, let me find it, on page 5 of attachment 1, E talks about rooftop mechanical equipment must be within the height limit, and screened is fine. We all agree with that, I think. But we recently changed some ordinances that affected the downtown, and there we, I think, went to a fair degree of trouble here at PTC and also at City Council to change the whole definition based on downtown building committee findings, and we talked about different definitions of heights and screening and such like. So to me, this is just kind of thrown in there, and it must be at the height limit, and that wasn't really how we incorporated things when we're talking about the downtown. So I'd like to see maybe some more consistency in that approach.
Wasn't that the one where we struggled with the height of the staircase that got you
Yes, and
upstairs?
the elevator and all that.
Right, that it needs to be higher.
And John?
That's part of the existing code language, so the only thing we were doing there is changing the number sequence. So that's within the current code, and there was no direction to change any of that. And the modifications you had made earlier would wrap into this.
Oh, so those ordinances that we adopted then apply to this? Okay, so that's addressed. Okay, thank you. And then one other question, and it occurred, I think we briefly touched on it with the mechanical lift system at 4880, but, in case of the power going out, the residents don't have access to their cars. So I wondered if that we should actually have a requirement about there being, generator backup power for those, because you could have however many, if you had 38 units, those people, we have an earthquake, power could be out for days. So I really wonder about some backup power source for that. And I think that was my major comment, but if I missed any places where I think benchmarks would be helpful, I think I mentioned most of them, but really with some of the numbers we're throwing, same with actually the building heights. Just like when we made the ordinance change about how tall the elevator could be on the rooftop, we really want to have realistic heights for what we're, just because we used to say 30 doesn't mean that that's right. So if we're going to change things, let's make them make sense. That's my feedback.
Okay. I guess we all should say it. I move unanimously that staff did a terrific job.
Yeah.
Okay? Good.
Thank you.
No one else has to say that. So I'm going to go through, I have sort of point-by-point ones. I concur with everything that Commissioner Meadows said. It goes along. I think benchmarks help because using subjective examples leads to, it's a path that leads to hell, so we want to be very careful about that. On a specific, I believe that in this area there should not be a public benefit available. I think we are imposed enough on by the state bonus requirements that any public benefit can only be to the detriment of control. And that's what we're attempting to do in the zoning code, is we're saying we are doing these things, but we want to have it done in an orderly manner, and the state has tied our hands in many aspects. So I'd like to avoid that if we can. I concur completely for the benchmarks of heights of floors with normal structure, as opposed to finding some superstructure that's going to hold it up with the thickness of a pancake. I don't know if it's possible, but I am aware that sometimes we make these code changes and they are not enforced for whatever reason. And I'm wondering if the city has looked into and could look into a bonding system, post a bond that maintenance is maintained, have the developer post a bond that for a period of time that the lift system is maintained, that if the queuing gets out of hand, there's money to go back and fix it a little so that the city and staff have a tool. It doesn't have to be onerous, but I think in some ways it sets an example, lets people know that no matter how small it is, we're paying attention, and they should be aware of it. I would agree with, I think you said, Sally, to allow loading area to be in the front setback. I don't see any, or maybe one of the speakers said it, because to me, the loading is a transient use. If the front setback is developed in such a way that it is still attractive, I think it would be foolish to take buildable space and throw it towards a loading zone. I think that can be incorporated carefully and well. I don't believe that the rear yard setback should be reduced at all. And this gets back to an earlier comment when I said, are the residents who live in multifamily housing less valuable to the city than a resident who lives in a one single family? And the answer is no. Our residents need protection no matter what. Granted, they bought property that abutted a CT zone, but as they're all learning, these things are more fluid than we thought they would be, probably that they thought they would be at the time they purchased, because the city is developing, and we're looking for places where we can do intensive development, and the El Camino is it. But I don't want to see them crucified by this. So if it's a multifamily budding a larger development, I think you should still have to stay away. The people who live there are just as valuable.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
So, because that was one of mine also, but it really depends to me who your back neighbor is. If it's a residential or multifamily, then yes.
That's the only thing.
What
I'm
if it's a
talking-
retail center or an office building?
Well, I only spoke of, I'm talking about residential.
So what I'm saying, what I'm thinking is that maybe we should have different rules for, depending on who's the neighbor.
Well, I think we do. What I'm saying is, in this particular instance, instead of differentiating between multifamily and single-family, I'm saying it's residential across the board, in my opinion. And then for multifamily, I agree, it should not be. I think I and K should be accepted use, and therefore they are not conditional uses if what we want to do is incorporate that. I think it was a very shrewd point that if you link the number of units to the open space, then you are making it as an unintended consequence that the developer will reduce the number of units in order to reduce the open space. So I think we need to have a non-linked limit on that and figure out what we want that to be. I have no problem with the passive use of the 20-foot landscapes buffer, as long as it's not where the boom boxes are. I guess that's the way to put it. Loading, buildable, oh yes, I agree, as I said, I would reiterate what Sally said, that the benchmarks for buildable sizes, if it's 11 and a half feet instead of 10, then that's what we should make our bonus and go from there. I think, let me just look, there's some other questions here. Nope, that covers everything for today.
Okay, all great comments. There's one thing I didn't quite agree with, Phoebe, but the specific purpose should be updated. We do need the benchmarks. I think what I would like to see is not us do a piecemeal approval of some things in here, but really think of this holistically and have it all come back for consideration based on all of our comments and sort of straw polls on what we each think about specific provisions. benchmark on the square footage for private use, common open space, queuing, I agreed with all those. The rear setback is the one exception that I am comfortable with these reductions. And I really did like the Menlo Park approach to the private space, but also agree with you, Phoebe, but if you link it to a unit, you're going to reduce the number of units and maybe we want to increase the density. Passive use of landscape, totally agree with that. Loading allowed in the front, I completely agree with that. We shouldn't protect the space for loading vehicles and at the sacrifice of actual apartments. In terms of the public benefit, I think that we would probably benefit, if it's possible, to have our city attorney weigh in on this. I believe, from a legal perspective, this is a strategy that is actually setting the ceiling at what public benefit could be. And when we leave it unlimited, then someone can come to us and say, well, we can have 2 stories. And when we give a menu of what a public benefit would grant somebody, say you can get 1 extra story, I think we actually are planting a flag so that we have provided a ceiling of what can be had by providing affordable housing, and without that, they can actually ask for much more.
But the affordable housing triggers a state density bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Does it trigger any other exceptions to the zoning code?
Well, it says they can get 1, or if they can get one exception variance, or they can get 2.
Well, no, what I'm saying is I'm trying to differentiate between public benefit versus state mandate for affordable housing. Because a public benefit to me the affordable housing is the way to get the state to override our local zoning, basically.
But is it a public benefit?
I think we would benefit from the attorney.
I think, I agree.
On it.
The majority of the audience thinks it's not, so, I mean, it's more.
Well, but I would like to hear what John has to say.
Oh, sorry.
Well, the state, through the adoption of the density bonus regulations, has said that the creation of additional housing units addresses a critical concern here in the state of California. So in order to provide incentives to developers to create those affordable units, they get the benefit of additional
exactly
market rate units. So
That's the
that's
intent,
one
exactly.
benefit to the developer, not to the city. You mind the city's or the state's benefit is this additional affordable unit. The developer gets additional market rate units, and in order to accommodate those additional market rate units, they get some exception to our zoning requirements through either a waiver or a concession. And it depends upon the number of affordable units that they provide that links to the benefit or the number of benefits that they get. Now, there's also some state parking requirements that someone could come in and say, without calling it even a waiver or a concession, they could say, I want to apply the state's density bonus parking requirements to my project.
So none of these is a City of Los Altos defined public benefit. That's what I'm trying to differentiate between. And I think it's a language issue that we have to be very careful about, because the state mandate is different than what we as a city could offer.
Absolutely.
Parallel or in addition.
Yeah.
And if I could add as well, one of the speakers brought up that in our code for the CRS zone district, for example, we do have provisions that allow for exceptions, minor exceptions to our site development standards if they bring forward a public benefit that furthers the downtown design plan. And the code actually lists what those benefits could be for the developer.
It lists public benefits?
The public benefits in the code
choices.
itself,
Yeah.
things such as paseos that connect streets and parking areas and so
Because it
forth.
connects to the downtown plan, which we have in place.
It does, that's right.
But that's not what's happening here.
No, this is something that is on our to-do list to discuss with the council as well. what are the public benefits that a project developer can bring forward, and what can the city negotiate? I've had a conversation with a developer or two and said, if you take the development agreement route where you are agreeing with the city to allow a certain project in exchange for some kind of benefit, what form of benefit to the city could that take shape? I've pointed them to our capital improvement plan. The Public Works Department has a big, long list of projects that the city would like to get accomplished. And if a developer would be willing to fund or help support one of those projects, then, that seems like a pretty good public benefit.
So it's not a public benefit in the CT zone per se, it's a public benefit to the city under the umbrella.
Under the umbrella.
Okay.
And the reason that we put this in here was that we did have some comments from council members that we should try and address or put a limit or identify the type of public benefit or the waiver or the exception to our development standards that they could get in return for a public development that they might bring forward. So it's kind of a discussion point, a starting point. It's the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, for a developer that's coming forward.
Can the city be more proactive? I've been in the front row seat speaking up here to the other city planners and had the city planner say, if you want to do this exception, here is what you must do. Not, here's a suggested list. You got to put $1.5 million towards a park or whatever. And they would tell you what it is that you have to do, not suggest. It was.
Well, and I would hope that their suggestions are supported by some kind of policy document or something adopted by.
So it doesn't
their
look like
council.
blackmail? Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't look like blackmail. Trying to keep everybody above
But I
board
think
here.
it's the language that's, I think, confusing me, and it's making the issue fuzzy. So
Yeah,
forgive me
it's-
for interrupting again, Ronit, because you haven't finished, I know, but I feel like when it comes back to us again, it would be really good to have a handle on what is mandated. When people are concerned that things are getting too big, then we can't control it because there's the state mandate. Where do we have control? And I'm not sure public benefit fits in this, but enough.
Okay. Some other comments, the mechanical parking, I would like to at least maybe benchmark the issue of whether visitor parking should be its own parking, and how we do the queuing and encourage more systems if it becomes more efficient. And I like the idea of having a generator power supply. It's hard to imagine it wouldn't be built with it. With respect to some of the comments about when we compare what's happening on the other side of the street in Mountain View, I actually think that these provisions are putting a flag in Los Altos, and it is saying that we are really not Mountain View. And by codifying what is really realistic, sensible growth, we're clearly scaling back from what we are seeing across the street, but acknowledging that we are forward-thinking. And I agree, it is also not a question of if we go. We've grown. We are in what people consider a public housing crisis. And we have a responsibility, in my mind, to have sensible growth, and increasing density is an imperative. A lot of times we wring our hands like, oh, our people are leaving and our employees are leaving the area, and nurses and public school teachers can't afford to live in this area. And then someone suggests, well, let's add a floor. And everyone's like, no, find another way, because we don't want that to happen it's not in my backyard, I want smart planning and sensible, growth, but not here. And I don't think, that's the benefit of us not being elected, is that we can say that. And when residents, say, we don't want it here, we can say it's actually a state mandate that we increase our housing. And if we don't do it, that ability is going to be taken away from each of the cities, because cities across the state are not doing what they're required to do in terms of adding density and putting in housing. And at some point, the state isn't going to allow cities to behave in that fashion. So it doesn't. We are better off being forward-thinking and being sensible about the growth. I agree that the height should be probably 11 feet 6 inches, whatever it is. Let's get off the 45 feet. Like, let's just roll it to 47 and let everyone kind of wrap their head around it and accept that that's the real number. And 35, may not be the right number either. Or 46 and 57, I can't
It was
remember.
47 and 57 and 3 quarters.
46 and
I think.
57. And then the open space, I said I like the passive use in the open space. I do like the idea of incentivizing, not disincentivizing people from building smaller units by having the requirement. And I think those were all my comments. I'm looking forward to actually seeing this come back and having us
Yeah, me too.
put something that really can work. We do always talk about wanting to maximize density, and I think the not so secret is that some people actually don't want that. But it's our responsibility, so hopefully we can get it through.
I guess I'm going to have to repeat a lot of what's already been said. I do agree that multifamily should be a high priority and that we should encourage it, low cost and regular. So it should be permitted, not come in as a conditional use permit. I'm not sure how, but it has to be encouraged. I do agree with neighbors, behind these properties that, they've gotten used to a certain lifestyle, and it's difficult, and I think we have to make sure we protect them when we do put in these larger buildings. So privacy screening is a must, and it has to be enforced. Not sure how that can be put into the code, but it definitely has to be a priority. And I like to push the building as far as possible to the front. So if I had an option, I would reduce the front setback and increase the rear. And on that, along the same line, I do agree with Phoebe that multi-family shouldn't be that different from single family, that we should respect privacy in either case. So I would rather not see that setback be reduced for multifamily. To me, the side yard setback isn't a necessity because these are all buildings of the same nature next to each other, and I do understand the buffer and all that, but rear setback should be first, then the side, then the front, and then the side. So for that reason, the loading with the front setback, I do agree also that it should take up some of the front setback, not eat into the building footprint, the loading zone. And then I also like to see the open space be linked to the square footage of the building as opposed to the number of units, because that was the first thought I had, is I would just make more units. And so that should be tied to something other than the number of units. And then I do agree, the mechanical system I saw was great. I just do worry about outages and visitors, being confused. Maybe there's a provision in there where visitor parking should not be mechanical, that the visitor parking should be open space. And those were all my notes.
I had another thought that I'd just like to pass, because I was talking to one of our arts commissioners, and perhaps we could have a condition for art in public places. If you're going to put a big building, could we have some art, too?
Okay, that wasn't on my list.
I forgot to mention yes, I do agree that we do want to add another 12 to 24 inches to the height to make it a reasonable height. We're not adding a whole new story. We're just making giving a little wiggle room for structure. Practical.
To the floor, each floor height. Right.
Benchmark.
Okay, just some comments here, because I don't have to repeat everything. This is my end of the 7th year on the Planning Commission, and every time we have that we're building something, the audience has people in it that really say the same thing, and that is that, why can't we leave things the way they are? And, we like the village approach, and et cetera. And, I get that. I get that. I'm a victim of it myself. 4 or 5 years ago, I live in Brentwood, and Sutter Hill was on Los Altos Oaks. You know that Sutter Hill Hospital that they built there? It's a beautiful building. Well, I could say...
PAMF.
Palo Alto Medical Foundation.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, yeah. They were coming before the Planning Commission, and I was the head of the Planning Commission then, sitting right here, and I had to recuse myself. And of course, all the neighbors knew I was on the Planning Commission, so they all flocked around me, and they all had the same concerns every one of you have. And so did I, because it's my backyard, right? But actually, when they built the building, the neighbors, it all settled down, and the building's beautiful, and it's now part of the neighborhood. So I'm saying this because we can't, if you buy a house and the zoning in front of you is zone CT, we're not going to change that. All we're going to do is deal with the CT zoning. And that's what we're doing now. We're not going to tell those neighbors, there's a house behind you, they don't want you to build a building. We don't have that right. So the only right we have is to do the best we can given the parameters within the CT zoning, and that's what we're going to do. We're not going to tell a developer he can't build, because he can. So given that, here's some of the things that I think are important. One is that I think that multifamily should be a permitted use and not a conditional use. Let's just make it an F on that and make it a permitted use, because really that's what's going to happen. I'm all for allowing in the front setback also. It's the most obvious place to do that. And I'd like to leave the rear setback as written to protect all the neighbors as much as we possibly can. The best opportunity we have for density housing is on the El Camino corridor, so we really have to deal with that. And I'm not an architect, but if it's 46 feet rather than 45, and it's 47 3/4 rather than 55, then I think we ought to just write that in, and why have everybody come to us and say, I want another foot or I want another 2 feet? Let's just deal with it right from the beginning. Be practical about it. And I also think that the 20-foot landscape buffer should count as open space, because it's going to be landscape. It's landscape. It pretty much defines what it's going to be used for anyway, so if it's going to be called that, let's make it that. That's about all I have to say. Are there any other further comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Well, first I want to check if staff has got sufficient feedback so that if there was a motion to be made that said, could we have this comprehensively back to incorporate what you heard a majority of the planning commissioners agree on, and whatever else things you found in staff that made you guys happy, could we get another pass at it? Or do you have enough information to do that?
I believe we do. Do you want me to go through the list that I have?
And it goes from here to city council?
No, it's going to come back. I'm going to make a
That sounds like
motion.
you would like to have it brought back.
What
to
did you hear us say?
To begin with, I heard you talk about the open space for private and common. You want us to take a look at the amounts that were suggested in the ordinance before you this evening and develop a benchmark. I heard that the Menlo Park standard was something that we could emulate or look to as providing that benchmark. There was a question about the 15% queuing for...
Wait, before you leave that, and break the linkage between number of units and amount of landscape, amount of open space, in favor of total development as opposed to numbers of units.
Okay, got that. Then there was a question about the queuing area for the parking, 15%. It looked like you wanted to find another benchmark for
Or
that.
just know what the benchmark is.
You know, I've looked, and I have found very few good guidelines for that, and this is, the 15% happens to be one of those guidelines. We can maybe talk to our friends in the engineering department and see if they have any suggestions for that.
But I think it is a good point that if you've got two lift systems versus one, then you know 15% isn't right across both those situations.
Right.
So
we'll continue to explore that. You want to allow mixed use, and mixed use includes multifamily and multifamily as a by right use in the CT zone.
So it's part of the CT zoning, not a...
permitted use.
Right, permitted use. You would like to see a requirement for the mechanical parking systems include the installation of a generator for downturns in power. You were talking about the permitted height of the buildings in the CT zone district, looking at that as being not rather than 45 feet, 46 or 47 feet, depending on what a good building standard for the finished floor to
And
finished
before you move
floor
past that, and visitor parking not being in the mechanical system.
Yes, good point.
Yes, I have that down on the list. And then also for the exception, although I heard a little mix of comments regarding whether or not we should retain the public benefit versus waiver exception in the code.
we need more information.
That's very gray for me.
I think
More-
when you come back, you may
Okay.
present it the way that feels that staff can support it, provided that you can help us understand better, and from us, city council as well, why you're making these choices and what they are in relationship between public benefit defined by the city of Los Altos as opposed to state mandated bonuses or incentives, which are different.
Yes.
Okay, so we got that.
I know she said 47, but did you also get to the 57?
Yeah, I have 57 down as well.
46 and 57.3.
Right, so it's an additional 10.
Or whatever works out to be the
Right.
best in terms,
Benchmark.
in terms of an appropriate finished floor to
Realistic
finished floor
height.
height. Then there was allowing the landscape buffer at the rear of a property to be counted towards the open space for the units, and then link that again, not to the number of units, but to the size of the development. Explore a bond system that would guarantee the continued operation and maintenance of these parking systems for a period of time, whether or not we would be allowed to do that.
And landscape,
Pardon me?
and the landscape buffer.
And the landscape buffer. Allowing the loading zone to be within the front yard setback. There was some comments about a reduction in the front yard setback. It's now presently 25 feet. Is there any number you would be comfortable seeing that reduced to?
I don't think we have a consensus on that. That was not
Yeah,
going to
there's
change.
no change. I just heard a comment, so I was just seeing if you want me to explore that further. No?
I'm okay with exploring it. I'd rather, if we're going to keep it, the setback in the back as deep, I don't have a problem pushing it.
That's funny, because for me, putting the loading zone in the setback was the trade-off for getting the bigger, holding the rear.
I was happy with that
Got
too,
it.
but if there's room.
Okay, well,
There's
we
tiny
can-
lots.
we can kind of develop something and see what you have to think about it. No reduction in the rear yard setback.
At this-
think that there's a division
but-
on that issue.
Well, that's why I was saying that they should bring up
Yeah.
what they can support, and then we can discuss them more realistically.
And then a requirement for public art.
I promised her.
I'm not sure we need to vote on anything.
No, so I move that we allow staff to review, based on the comments by the commissioners and speakers, a modified version of this to incorporate those discussion points that John just said, and come back at our next meeting.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right, great.
And I heard bring it back to the next meeting.
Can you do it at the next meeting? Is that too soon?
I was just going to say, can we, let's do it at the next meeting. Let's get this done.
Well, because you're under pressure, so it would be good if, I would like us to be responsive if you're under time pressure.
We will bring it back to your next meeting.
So that'll be February 16th for the rest.
16th, yes, February 16th.
Okay.
Thank you.
Comments and feedback.
Next.
Who got the second on that?
I did.
I think we all got it. Agenda.
Okay, the agenda, here we go. Okay. Okay, do we have any commission reports and comments?
I was at the last city council meeting.
Turn your mic on.
You may have read about it in the paper.
It was a good one, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. If you like really long.
No, as an
noisy.
aside, I wanted to thank all of the, I'm
Meetings?
sure we all feel the same way, all of you folks who came out here to give us
yeah.
your opinion. We really value, I hope you know, what you think about everything that goes on in Los Altos. We happen to live in the best city in the world, so.
He says modestly.
Okay, something that came up relevant to the parking committee. They, staff presented the report that the parking consultant that we hired completed. It was a 6-month review of the work that the parking subcommittee had done
Right.
a year and a half before, and I'm on it, and so is Mike. So it was following, I mean, you know the history, so right. So they were trying to figure out what to do next with that report. And
Did the council take any action?
yeah, so there was a debate over whether it should come to the Planning Commission for consideration of each of the individual recommendations within the parking subcommittee. So, for example, one of them,
What did they decide? I thought they decided they were going to.
they decided that they wanted, and maybe, John, you can even explain better what they decided, but I believe they concluded that it should go to staff for their remarks and recommendations, come maybe back to city council, and then come to planning commission for consideration of the recommendations with staff's input.
Them to take their conversation.
They, pretty much that, they asked staff to go back and see if we could incorporate the recommendations of the parking committee into either ordinances or policies that then we would bring to you at the Planning and Transportation Commission level, and you would make a recommendation onto the city council.
That's what the papers, I thought that was the paper said.
So,
But there was a debate about whether it should even come to the parking.
Planning Commission.
To the planning commission.
But that was decided eventually that it would come after
Yes.
staff.
And then after us, it goes back to the city council.
and then it
We
goes back to
recommend
city
to city
council. And
council.
that's in line with what the council said when they first adopted the report of the Parking Advisory Commission. Have it go through the planning commission for
Right, it was
recommendation.
always supposed to be a forward trajectory of that work. And it appears to be actually moving forward.
Good.
So one day, it may come before us.
And did they do any other action that affects us?
There was a discussion about talking at the retreat, and I guess the retreat is public, but I wasn't there, so, about making taking the transportation out of our commission and creating, I don't know if you recall, but like 4 years ago, there was
We
a
had
separate,
that,
right.
yes.
And going back to that and having a planning commission and a separate transportation commission, and they were going to discuss it at the retreat. I don't know what the conclusion or discussion that came from that.
Well, the city manager is still pulling together his notes, but it sounds as if there might be, for lack of a better word, a committee that will look at pulling some of the transportation responsibilities out of the Planning and Transportation Commission and coming up with a new committee. But we'll all keep you posted on what the exact steps are going to be and how that will be formed.
I feel like one of those slinkies going.
Ping pong, ping pong.
Okay. Is that it?
Also, wasn't there, isn't Jolie will be leaving
Yes.
the city?
Getting a new city
And we're
attorney.
getting, so what are her?
That wasn't in the
dates?
public discussion. That was in the
Well,
private.
I've
That
heard-
became public, I think.
Oh, yeah, because I probably read it. I wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in
so,
the paper, yeah.
Okay, so that's not a function of that. But I mean, it does potentially, will we have a gap? What are her things?
I understand that the city council is going to move forward pretty quickly to identifying a new city attorney, and if there is a lag between the identification of a new city attorney to come to work for the city and the Jolie's last day with the city, then she would continue serving in the role as city attorney for a period of time until
Interim.
a new one was identified.
All you do is, the city just contracts with them.
Correct. It's a contract.
Contract
position.
items, that's all.
So that would be February 28th then, by which they would either have to hire someone or
Okay.
continue.
I can't find the minutes, David, but we had at the last meeting, we discussed, we put something on as a potential agenda item. How close are we getting to adding that to an agenda?
Well, we were hoping to put it on your next calendar, just to give you a sense of what's been approved in the past. We'll see how it shakes out with these CT regulations, but you know, we've one of our staff people has kind of collected all of the, I guess, public benefits that have been provided to the city for past projects. So, and that's on the city council's calendar as well, to talk about public benefits and, you know, what those are and what they might be and how we could go about
that's
achieving
important,
those.
isn't
And so that'll be actually going to be probably a workshop between you and the city council members at a meeting in the near future.
Okay with that?